Hi there. So I decided to go ahead and do a uh, demo draw along for the homework assignment. Um, Starts with gestures, 1 minute. So what we're going for with a 1 minute pose is just the very basic idea about the pose itself. So as always, we want to start with a general idea of where everything's going to go. So that's why I always like to mark the top and the bottom of my drawing. So I make sure that I try and fit the entire figure within that specified space. From there, it'll help me to practice my proportions and continue looking at the entire figure from um, the very big, longest action lines or curves that I can find, and trying to just get a very simplified sense of the pose. We're not going to be able to get very far with something like this. Obviously, the more you practice, the further you'll be able to get. But it's more about just getting loosened up and getting your eye kind of conditioned to see the most important aspects first. Now, this next pose is a reclining pose, so I'm going to start with it as kind of an organic shape. I'm going to try and blur my eyes or squint and try and see the model's pose as rather than kind of a structure from top to bottom like we do with the standing action poses. I'm trying to see it as a simple organic shape, and then I'm going to take that shape and try and find the the parts within that shape. So you can see I started with a big blob, and then I started to locate where the legs are and locate kind of where a sense of the torso is. And then you'll see I'll start to build out where the arms are from within the head from within there. So it's just to get a general sense of the action or the balance or the overall story of the pose. So it can be kind of tempting to just jump into art making sometimes. I feel like I definitely have that tendency from time to time. But you'll notice on some of these gestures that I am pausing at the very beginning. And what I'm doing is I'm thinking, like, what's the best strategy? How should I approach this drawing? Like, does it make sense to mark the top and the bottom of the pose, or does it make sense to start with a simplified shape? You always want to start with the easiest strategy possible, okay? Sometimes there's no real easy strategy, but you always want to try and find the easiest strategy because that's going to give you a lot of times the very best result, okay? If things are difficult, there's no reason to make it difficult just for the sake of it being difficult unless, that's the point that you're what you're going for. But yeah, so take a moment, think about how you're going to strategize the drawing or the composition or whatnot, whether you're painting or drawing or doing anything from life. You'll save yourself a lot of wasted time thinking through like how to do things. And just also, there's no right or wrong way to approach the figure. I feel very strongly that the best approach is just to practice. Practice from life. Practice as much as you can. Figure out what's important to you. I mean, I have my own values in this class. I'm interested in the story and the drama. I'm interested in weight and balance and a sense of volume. So those are kind of the things that I prioritize when I'm drawing. But you can do whatever, any way that you can get there is fine by me. Ultimately, any kind of art making, art education is a solo journey. Some people like to make a big deal about being self-taught or whatnot. On some level, I think everybody that has done a lot of art and kind of learned a lot of things probably understands that really everyone on a certain level is self-taught because no one can make you understand it their way. And in fact, as soon as you realize that you need to come to your own understanding about ideas, the sooner you can start getting to really making your own work be it's to meet its potential. Okay, so um, you kind of have to figure out what it is that you want and then just go for it. And teachers like me, we can help you along the journey, but you'll take what is important to you or aspects that you like of it, and then you should leave the rest behind. All right, now we're going to move on to some 2-minute poses. So I'll be able to get a little bit further along, but still the same strategy for a 1-minute pose is a good place to start. Okay, trying to think of the pose first by setting the limits being either some kind of a simple organic or geometric shape that kind of encompasses the entire figure, or that was bad. I guess I have to start that one over. So yeah, thinking about a simple geometric shape that encompasses the entirety of the pose, but after getting that shape established, it's a good idea to try and find the main parts of the body. The main parts being the torso, the arms, the legs, the head. And then from there on, the neck, the hands, the feet, the face. Those are the basic parts. If you can get to all that stuff, then you're doing a good, and you like how the result is, then you're doing a good job of short pose drawing. So here you see I started with the base being that straightened arm, as well as the thigh on the right and the knee kind of holding the balance of the pose. And the last part that I'm concerned with is that sort of the opposite arm. That's obviously it's a part of the pose and the drama of the pose, but it's there's a little more wiggle room in terms of its importance. You know, if I didn't get that arm in, it could still feel like it was a decent pose, but if the legs aren't in, it's just a floating ghost of a figure. Something you'll also notice on these 2-minute poses, because there's a little bit more time, I'm getting to a little bit more structure. And what is structure? Well, if we think of gesture as the big flowing marks kind of an idea, structure is really kind of the idea of the skeleton. It's what makes it feel solid or feel like it's like the figure is present. So you'll see I might add center lines. I might add a little bit of corners. Corners are a good way to show structure, but you'll see corners at like where there are natural corners in the body, like the elbows, the knees, anytime where the shoulder, anytime a bone comes to the surface. You also have ankles, wrists. Those are some spots where you can get a lot of structure in. Okay, like here I have this the right leg is a nice flowing curve, and the left leg has a bend in it. It starts to build out the structure. Okay, and then I'm going to go to the arms and sort of build these kind of Gumby arms that have a nice flow, a good energy to them. And once I feel like everything is in the right spot, then I can return to what I've already done and start to develop it further. So I like to take a moment and do the drawing in parts like this, because this way I'm not going to proceed to develop more anatomy before I feel like I have a good pose, or a pose that is realistic or reflective of what the model is doing. Okay, so now I'm only starting to get to the hands after kind of establishing a good energetic pose. And so the next question is going to be, I need some structure. So you'll see I'm going to add a little bit of a corner there for the knee and the swoop of that shin bone. Okay, whenever I'm adding structure, I'm thinking about the bones first of all, right? And yeah, building it out from there. So always move from gesture to structure, and then you go back to gesture, and then back to structure, and that's kind of the approach that I like to take when I'm drawing the figure. Sometimes when drawing, and you're doing like an interesting pose or an interesting shape, if you can get a good grasp of a simplified organic shape of the pose, it can do a lot of good, all right? And sort of let the lines be nice and flowy and sort of moving between parts. You'll see there's a nice center line right there. I was looking to the spine to sort of get that in. There are two center lines, or natural center lines in the body and the torso. One is on the front, and that goes from basically the pit of the neck through the belly button and down to the crotch. And then on the back of the body, you have the angle of the spine, which goes from obviously the base of the skull and all the way down to the legs. And you'll see a lot of times I'm just sort of trying to find a simple shape for maybe if a leg is squashed together. It doesn't take much, just kind of thinking about if two limbs come together, or like the upper leg and lower leg kind of squish together, just simplify it down to one overall shape to begin. Right, now I've gotten a little bit of my details or my big ideas down. I can add some structure, so putting the corner of the elbow, the corner of the wrist, and if there's even time for that, and I feel like I've gotten, I'm running out of time, but I like where it's at so far, add the darkness of the hair. It just adds a little bit of realism to the drawing. So whenever you're taking a complex problem like drawing the entire human form, you usually want to simplify things from big to small. So you'll notice, I'd like you to notice that I'm often trying to develop some sense for the torso, which is everything basically from the shoulders to um, just a little bit below the legs, the base of the pelvis. So I like to always try and build out a torso that has the right proportions within the space that I'm using, and then build the legs off of there, focusing on the base and making sure that my figure stands strong and has a good sense of energy um, between those elements. So here I built out the torso to begin with, and now I'm building out the limbs off of there. And I'm not getting over zealous about any anatomy at this point. I'm really just trying to focus on getting a pose that has all the parts of the body in the right place, kind of with the right sort of action. And that action, being the figure curved over, um, arms reaching out, a strong base where it feels like there's some sense of gravity. So again, building out that simplified torso. And as I add details that show volume, um, I'm going to try and add those details in a way that still solidifies those basic limbs, right? The torso, the arms, the legs. I'm always trying to get a good, solid kind of lay-in foundation of the figure. Okay, so now we're switching to a 5-minute pose. This one is a rather complicated, or a little bit more complex, a little bit more difficult reclining pose. When I get a reclining pose, such as this one where Rajiv is leaning across the floor and kind of reaching into the air, I'm going to try and definitely start with a simple shape, right? I'm breaking it down, almost thinking of the pose as kind of a mountain range. And rather than looking at the exact, specific contours of that shape, I'm just trying to simplify the whole thing down into like an easy, manageable shape with a lot of straight lines. The difficult part of this is trying to keep those proportions of that mountain range uh, somewhat accurate. So if you need to use your thumb or with some sort of plumb line measuring techniques just to check how everything looks, then that's what you need to do. Something that's important to me here, I remember while I was drawing this thinking like, gosh, I hope I didn't make that back leg shorter so that it would fit on the page. I got a little bit too far to the left for what I would prefer most of the time. But you can see that starting with that simple kind of shape has given me a good location, good like kind of general location for everything's where everything's going to be. And now from there, I'm starting to break that mountain range into smaller shapes, smaller structural shapes, such as now the torso. And I'm also thinking a little bit more volumetrically, like when I'm drawing the torso, I'm drawing it a little bit more like almost like a pillowcase that's bent in half, kind of the way this along the spine, as opposed to a flatter, more two dimensional version of the rib cage that works better when when the model is standing. Okay, so now I'm very carefully kind of making sure I get a sense of the volume of the head. We're looking under Rajiv's chin here, so I kind of have the curve of the mandible, that jawbone underneath, and then I'm spending a little extra time to build out a simplified version of this structural arm, right? This arm has become the base because it's holding the rest of his body up. So that's going to affect everything up to that shoulder, right? If you're holding your body up with one arm, your shoulder is going to be a little bit higher. So you can see that's kind of pushed up above a little bit. And then as far as the fingers, I'm not trying to draw the entire fingers of the hand. I'm just kind of indicating where some of the joints are. And here, just to clear things up, putting the pectoral muscle kind of in front of the head and kind of connecting the arm, using that to connect the arm to the torso, right? There's a nice strong overlap in there. I want to make sure the arm is in front of the torso, okay? And then using the model's Speedo, I guess, as a good opportunity to kind of wrap around, just following the line of how it kind of wraps around the hips will give a lot of volume to the pose as well. And now you can see I'm building out the leg and the feet, kind of thinking about skeletal anatomy again, looking to the point of the knee, to the ankle, and you'll notice when I did the calf on Rajiv's right leg, it was just as simple as kind of almost an egg shape. So that's one of the secrets to foreshortening, is kind of using egg shapes and sort of working from foreground to background. So here I'm using that Speedo again to kind of develop to the curvature of that Speedo where the leg comes out is a good way to show the direction that the leg is coming out. There's the center line that goes from the belly button up to the pit of the neck. And now I'm here building out the rib cage a little bit, and also the nipples. If you have something symmetrical, anatomical feature like the nipple, for example, it's good to have both of them on there because it helps lead the eye across, and it gives a sense of volume without having some kind of line just draw all the way across. And that's it for that 5-minute pose. So I think this is a standing 5-minute pose. Yeah, you can see because I put the oblique X in there. And now I'm trying to find a big curve. I'm focusing on the torso, the biggest form that I can, first of all, finding the tilt of the hips and using that to kind of start to build out the legs. It's basically a it's a slightly complex stick figure, right? Now here's the tilt of the shoulder, maybe the arm starting to come out, curving around, those sort of Gumby arms. Worry about the joints later, and then the head in front. And I have a little horizontal line wrapping around the egg shape of the head to kind of give me a sense of volume, so that way I know that the head is tilted slightly down. We're looking more at the top of the head than looking straight on or at the bottom. And then again, trying to build out the shoulder, considering the balance of the pose, making sure that he feels like he's leaning far enough back. And the more you exaggerate the pose. By exaggerate, like if someone's leaning, lean them a little bit further, right? When you exaggerate, it just allows for a kind of greater level of dynamism to the drawing. And what happens is, as you start adding anatomy, it can oftentimes make the pose look a little more stiff. So exaggerating in the initial stages is usually a good idea. And here you can see I'm building that shin bone, tapering it out a little bit. It's a simplified two-dimensional idea of the leg. So I'm almost like skipping over the small details. You could think of it as just trying to focus on like what is the shape of the skeleton really, and kind of drawing it a little thicker or a little bit wider. Again, using the clothing that the model's wearing to kind of describe the roundness of the stomach, and the leg coming out of the pants kind of gives us a sense of direction for the knee coming forward. And then not being afraid to draw through things like I did with that back leg, so you can kind of see right through it. It's important to be able to do that, and you can use your finger with fine charcoal to easily kind of erase it after the fact. But I just draw right through as though I have x-ray vision, and then when I'm done with that, just go in with my finger and kind of smudge it out, so it brings us back to proper overlap hierarchy. Okay, now here's a center line. I like the center line because it's a good tool to show a twist going from that pit of the neck down to the belly button. And now building out that last arm, and you can see that sort of point that I added on the inside is sort of represents the elbow, the bone, the elbow bone poking out. And here, developing the hand, I'm going to focus on anatomical areas like the wrist and the point of the elbow, and it's going to add a lot of structure to this. Again, what I said on the last drawing, that idea of foreshortening. If you sort of take a complex form that's foreshortened and try and find egg shapes that work from foreground to background, you'll tend to have a good sense of space. It's a good strategy for foreshortening. And now here I'm developing the face a little bit further. The midway point is the eyes. Slightly below that, almost halfway, is the nose. And I'm starting to build out a little bit of the model's hair, but I won't go too far with that before I return to probably the shoulder and the neck. I guess I'm going for the wrist a little bit more. And we're almost out of time on that one, so let's see what final details I'm going to put in it. There's the nipple that sort of leads across, gives you a sense of where the chest is. Adding some shadow, starting to work it in, but then I think we're about to run out of time on this one. Okay, so here's the last pose in the set. This is a reclining pose. It's a fairly complex one. So whenever I'm working with a reclining pose, again, I try and think of a very simple shape, almost like a mountain range, or you could almost imagine kind of draping. If you draped a sheet over the model, like what would that simple shape look like? So I'm kind of building out, where the head is relative to where the feet are. Trying to think of this in very oversimplified terms, and then carve out the smaller parts within that bigger shape. And you get better at this over time. Again, working to find the torso, the largest anatomical form being the torso. And I'm putting a center line in there early, since it just makes sense for this the complexity of this pose, and trying to help me place the legs. If you place that center line in there, it'll help you figure out the legs. But now I'm noticing that I didn't leave enough room for that foot. So even though we're a good minute into the pose, I decided it's better to start over. Again, whenever you notice that there's a problem, fix it right away. So I noticed that even though I was a minute in and I was kind of liking where the drawing was going, that it was a better idea to start over and make sure that I get that foot in there. So now I moved the whole composition over probably about an inch, and I'm being very careful to notice, okay, here's the knee, here's the foot, here's the hand, and here's the head. And I'm asking myself if this is a better arrangement, okay? And I'm returning to now drawing the torso once more, starting from that big form, trying to develop the torso simply and in a way that's proportionate to the marks that I indicated already. So here's the hip kind of curving around. The last time I put the center line in next. Let's see what happens now. I feel like the center line is really important, so it'll come very soon. Top of the head, thinking about the top of the head. Drawing the cranium. And thinking about the angle of those hips. And there's that center line, like I said. Pit of the neck to the belly button and down to the crotch. That's sort of the center line on the front part of the torso. It's really good. If you put center lines in, they help you to organize the rest of the space. They help you to think about proportions kind of left and right and across the form, as opposed to just a very simple two-dimensional proportion. Okay, so I put that base arm, the arm that's sort of holding up the model on his left-hand side, down. And now I'm thinking about those hips. That center line again will help me develop the hips, and I'm starting from the back end of the hip, curving around using the detail of the Speedo as kind of a nice, easy way to wrap around the form. I extend that out to the knee, and I sort of added a front plane to the knee as well, just to let me know that this is a flat plane where the knee ends. And now I'm trying to build out the second knee, and I'm trying to think through the anatomy and make sure that everything fits, right? And sometimes it makes sense, like in this case, the leg is bent over itself. And I think I'm gonna draw the leg just as one continuous shape, as opposed to trying to draw the thigh and then the shin, right? So I'm just building it out as a simple shape, and then kind of thinking like a sculptor and carving out the anatomy later, right? I think I'm going to end up stopping there and moving on to probably the shin. And that extends. I like to curve that because there's a natural curve there on the shin bone. That's not the silhouette of the leg, but it sort of represents the structure, which is the bone, right? Anytime you can combine a structural mark like a bone with a gesture, which is that nice curve, I usually think it's a good idea, okay? So I started with the shin bone, and I knew that's where I wanted the foot to end up. Next will be chiseling away at that shape of the foot. Find the ankle. This is all oversimplification right now. The more you draw, the more you kind of learn to design better, because really life drawing on some, or figure drawing on some level, is a matter of design. At least if you do it on the regular, you're getting better at sort of, you're making better and better aesthetic decisions based on what you like, right? So now I have that hand floating out there. That hand is not structural, so there's a lot of room to kind of play around with it. And I have a nice swoop. He's just holding the arm up. It's not holding structure, so the kind of the loose or the soft kind of arabesque flow of that arm strengthens the gesture. And then I'm strategically looking to knuckles and the wrist and the elbow, the bump of the elbow, to add the structure. You don't need to do much. And just that structure plays so well off of the flowing gesture that, the viewer will be able to feel that volume and that weight without even me necessarily articulating all the anatomy, or really an accurate, it's not a super detailed contour line of the arm, right? I'm just finding the overall gesture and then looking to the structure, the anatomy, like the corner of the elbow where there's a bend in the arm, and using those strategic clues, like what's the most important thing to this pose that will make my figure that much more convincing. Okay, so this head is quite foreshortened. So I want to curve the line of the eye and the front, and then slightly below that, the nose. And then I'm making a sort of curve of the jaw underneath, because we're looking up at it. And the challenging part from here is going to be connecting the head to the torso with the neck. So you can see I'm looking very carefully here. When the neck leans back like that, it's going to kind of compress and bulge a little bit. So the neck is going to look really wide. When someone leans back, their neck tends to get a little bit wide. And I'm looking for the stretch of those strong, there's called the sternomastoid muscle that reaches from the ear down to the clavicle. Okay, and now I'm not very happy with the shape of the head. It looks a little too big, so I'm chiseling away a little bit. This is the beauty of Vine charcoal, is you can use your finger to kind of chip away at things. And I'm sort of adding a little bit more structure, making sure that that neck kind of feels like it plugs in under the jawbone a little bit more, indicating where the eyes are, looking at the angle there. And I'm going to move the nose up because I think it was a little too low. And just indicating the mouth. A lot of drawing is just learning how to indicate, or how to suggest something without being so explicit, right? We all know how to copy a photo, so if you have to get more explicit, you can. But for this kind of drawing, I'm trying to be as efficient as possible. I'm always asking myself, like, what's the next most important anatomical detail that's going to tell the story of the pose? The story of the pose here being, and for me, story can mean whatever you want it to be. For me, I'm usually looking for balance. I'm looking for a feeling of weight. I'm looking for a sense of drama or flow to the gesture. I guess that goes into story. And I'm looking for a sense of volume. Those are usually the ideas that I'm going for when I'm drawing from life. So I take a lot of care to think about the construction of simple forms, right? The anatomy that I'm using is very basic, but it involves a lot of understanding of, like, the skeleton, and a simplified skeleton, and a simplified version of the muscles and bones and that kind of thing. Okay, now he's leaning back right here, and there's a really strong sense of the rib cage. So I'm going to put in kind of the angle of the ribs, and then the other side of the ribs. Whenever you see an anatomical detail on one side, if it's symmetrical, I always like to then immediately go and try and add the complementary anatomical detail on the opposite side. Okay, so looking at that rib cage, I didn't just put one rib kind of floating in the middle. I also put the other side of the rib kind of bulging out on the stretch side of his torso. And now using that Speedo again to kind of develop the shape of the hip, and starting to carve out from that initial compound shape of the knee and shin, just adding a couple lines that sort of suggest the rest of the leg. All right, so I think I'm probably going to run out of time a little bit on this one, mostly because I think I had to start over on it. I didn't quite get as far as the last time I drew it, but that's okay. It's still a nice piece, and even though I think that the 10-minute time limit has expired, I just went in and knocked in a couple more shadows. All right, I hope that's helpful. Okay, thank you very much.